All right. Let's go down into the tunnel, into Joseph Stalin's masterpiece. This gives us a perfect way of seeing the construction. Each one of these is a segment, 6-7 foot long cast iron piece that is laid in like a model, you know? They just place these in, workers bolt this thing like crazy, and then through this opening here is injected concrete. 5 feet of concrete behind this. So as they move through, they continually build this tunnel piece by piece until they end up with this massive, massive space to defend against nuclear attack. The paranoia of that nuclear age, when people had to dig tunnels like this, bunkers like this, 200 feet beneath the earth. Same thing was happening back home in the United States. People were building bomb shelters in their backyards. There, it was an everyman kind of thing. Here, it was a one-man kind of operation. Joseph Stalin.
Joseph Stalin had consolidated laborers who could begin to overhaul Moscow's infrastructure. The largest projects was an 80-mile canal that connected the Moskva River to the Volga River. Up to 25,000 people died constructing the canal, many of them simply buried where they fell. But that was just a drop in the bucket for Stalin's brutal and efficient plan for modernizing Moscow. He also built one of the greatest metros in the world, sprawling parks, awesome monuments, and improved nearly every aspect of its infrastructure, both above ground and below.
These giant tubes that run throughout this neighborhood are actually Soviet-era central heating. Most of the homes in Moscow still receive their heat and hot water from a central source developed under Joseph Stalin. And just as he engineered a heating system for the city, he also re-engineered the waterways. And I'm meeting with a guy who's going to take me under the streets to show me how.
I met with Terence Fabian again. Because the subterranean canals are strictly running 20 feet beneath the streets of Moscow are over 3,700 miles of pipes, a major part of Stalin's plan to modernize the city, but also the site of daring escapes, prisons, and torture chambers.
There's a lot of water down there.
He says that before we go down, we have to put on special safety harnesses.
Sure, of course. Okay. All right, perfect. All right. That's pretty basic, isn't it?
Yeah.
All right. Here we are, going down into Stalin's tunnels. Great. Hey, there we go. Thank you very much. You ready? Let's go. What is this water that we're in here? Where is this going?
This is runoff from the street right now, snow melt.
But heading to what?
Heading towards other connecting pipes down the way, collectors, and from here it's going to flow through the center of the city, empty into the Moscow River.
Today, Moscow sits above a network of 190 rivers, a virtual web of water. But before Stalin turned Moscow into a major metropolis, these waterways coursed above ground, causing major floods every time there was a heavy rain. In the late 1700s, Catherine the Great had a section of the Neglonaya River diverted under the city, where it flowed into a moat that once surrounded the Kremlin. After Napoleon's siege of Moscow in 1812, the rivers were so choked with debris from the war that several more were paved over. Then a series of underground drainage tunnels were built. As the city grew, Stalin expanded the sewer's drainage tunnels even farther into the massive system it is today. For years, the underworld created to save the city offered the perfect cover for Moscow's shadier citizens.
The Muscovites have been using these as shelters, Some homeless people live here. Convicts on the lam would be living down here. Smugglers would use them to hide their goods.
Right.
In a lot of cases, down by the Kremlin, they were used as dungeons and torture chambers.
Right.
But when heavy rains fell, the rush of water through these tunnels flushed out everything and everyone in its path. The constant flooding was tolerable when Moscow was simply an overpopulated port city. But when it became the capital of a vast empire, things had to change quickly.
For the 200 years that St. Petersburg was the capital of Russia, Moscow had been very neglected. It was in the early 20th century, it was basically an overgrown village.
Okay.
And in 1931, their goal was to turn it into a modern capital city.
Stalin was obsessed with making Moscow the ideal socialist city as fast as possible. That hinged on controlling its water flow. So his engineers started by repairing existing drainage tunnels like this one. Then they designed a new system of tunnels that would prevent flooding once and for all. But to get them built on Stalin's timetable, they needed cheap labor, and plenty of it.
In building these tunnels, where did the labor come from?
By the 1930s, they're already beginning to use convict labor. They decided to put them to work. Why not? Modernizing the tunnels as part of the effort to modernize the capital.
There weren't nearly enough criminals to realize Stalin's vision for Moscow, so he rounded up another source of labor, enemies of the revolution. Anyone who opposed his regime or just got in his way was thrown into a prison camp system, or gulag. Millions were forced into labor until they died. Others were simply murdered.
The writer Solzhenitsyn estimates that during Stalin's rule, some 60 million people died. That's 3 times the number that perished in the Second World War.
And this is 60 million people to bring this country up to speed in as short amount of time as possible.
Exactly.
We're talking about how many years here?
10, 20?
To go from basically a third world country to a military #1 power.
Today, these sewers quietly keep the streets and neighborhoods above safe from flood and disease. But Stalin's new underground water system actually worked against him. Anyone who was hunted by Stalin's secret service for opposing the communist regime now had a network of escape routes.
When the KGB, the secret police, were coming after people, they were using these tunnels as hiding places, as escape tunnels, right?
As escape tunnels in many cases, and not just in Stalin's time, but very recently, in the early 90s. There was one account of people escaping from the White House during the October coup attempt.
The White House, the government building here in Moscow.
Okay. They were escaping through the tunnels, the heating tunnels, the ventilation tunnels, the waterways.
Stalin's master plans to modernize Moscow and save it from flooding created this vast underworld. But in the end,
This station, and you have heroes of the Bolshevik Revolution, soldiers, sailors, airmen, peasants. But if you look at the whole design, you see that the architect was trying to convey a hidden message. All of these figures under the arches, hunched over like this. The architect wanted to suggest the repression of the people by Stalin. He got away with it, because in Soviet times, you could suggest something like that very subtly. People would read between the lines.
Right.
And also on the surface, this is a monument to the great Soviet people.
this subtle message may have slipped by Stalin's secret police, but the creation of a modern metro system was central to Stalin's vision for modernizing Moscow. The first line, known as the Red Line, was started in 1932 and opened just 3 years later with 10 stations covering almost 5 miles. By 1938, 2 more metro lines were running 100 feet beneath the city. Today, it's the busiest metro system in the world, but the tunnels millions of locals ride through every day only conceal Stalin's unseen underworld.
How many people ride this thing every day?
On an average weekday, between 8 and 9 million people.
8 and 9 million people a day.
Right. And in the course of a year, about 3 billion people.
Billion.
Right. That's half the population of the planet.
Over 75,000 workers labored over 5 years to create one of the deepest subway systems in the world. Many were professional miners and steel workers. Others were students eager to fulfill Stalin's vision of a modern socialist state. But the ultimate purpose of the Moscow Metro was to protect its people from Hitler's bombs.
One of the reasons that they decided to build such deep stations right in the heart of the city was for them to act as bomb shelters.
I see.
Because Stalin knew that war with Hitler at some point would be inevitable. People would come down here. It was open from sundown to sunup, and people could come down and sleep here on the platforms.
The fortified underground was desperately needed. On October 2nd, 1941, the Nazis began